Hello and welcome to a new video. Today we'll be talking about systems in World of Warcraft. In Shadowlands, in fact, a lot more systems will be added with covenants, soul conduits, etc. And the debate about this is quite heated, and in my honest opinion, for the wrong reasons. The issues reside not with the single parts of them, but the idea of systems and borrowed power as a whole. First of all, let's go through a very brief history of the game's expansion systems. They've been added in World of Warcraft since Warlords of Draenor, with the garrison system as the first iteration of the idea of content that will be changed and deprecated at the end of an expansion. The garrison was meant to be this wide system to which the whole expansion was tied to. Crafting and gathering was based around the garrison via the garden, the mine, or the profession buildings, giving even access to professions that you wouldn't normally be able to have. For the garrison, the only daily to gain the currency needed to upgrade your gear was available. Only available for the garrison were even some reputations via the trade post building. Even the questline for 6.2 content was bound to it. The garrison level 3 gave access to the shipyard and thus to the questline to get to Tanan Jungle. This was also the first time in which the mission table was added to the game, with the legendary item of the expansion, Khadgar's Ring, bound to it. But, you may say, this is not borrowed power. Yes, and at the same time, no. Not only the legendary ring was bound to the garrison, but player power as well. Since the mission table also outright dropped gear of item level above the one you currently had, up to mythic raiding gear. Borrowed power was a novelty in itself of Legion. The Exarch retained the mission table, if nerfed in gold rewards and gear rewards, at best offering dungeon quests, resuming the followers and resources. But artifacts were the main addition, and with those all hell broke loose. The artifact, in fact, were meant to be Legion's expansion-wide artifact power run in order to progress your only weapon for your spec. Once reached level cap at the time, in fact, you had to basically do any content available to you, all quests, dungeons, raids, PvP, because each of those activities actually gave you artifact power that you needed to progress your artifact and unlocking all the traits. The second spec, you had artifact knowledge, of course, and it was the first thing that they actually fixed as soon as possible in, I think, 7.05 or 7.1, speeding up and streamlining the gain of knowledge, that catch-up system, in order to not have to start from scratch after you came back from a break or if you just joined the game later in the expansion. The artifacts themselves fully redesigned specs, and they redesigned even how the loot worked. In Legion there were no more weapon drops, but only relics, with some specific transmogs as exceptions. Relics used to empower specific abilities or support traits in an artifact, but they also gave some item level. In 7.3, the artifact system saw the addition of the Netherlight Crucible, which allowed you to pick secondary traits on relics and diminish the RNG built in the system to some degree. Yes, it does sound familiar. Artifacts were basically deprecated at the end of Legion 2, as all of these systems. After a brief quest in which the artifacts had all their traits zeroed, In BFA was added the Heart of Azeroth, a neckpiece, basically the new artifacts, whose level unlocked traits belonging to single pieces of gear, head, shoulder and chest, specifically. If artifacts were complex and had issues based in their design and the balance about the classes and the specs, the Art of Azeroth added the gear traits, and the essences afterwards, and the corruption systems most recently. It's really hard to start discussing this without making this video hours long, so I'll stick to this. The Art of Azeroth levels give you access to the armor traits in the 3 slots I mentioned, these days automatically unlocked via the short quest lines that give you access to the essences. Essences are basically role-bound abilities that you can earn up to 4 levels each through various sources, reputations, dungeons, raids or PvP, etc. In 8.3, if this wasn't enough, we had the addition of the corruption system. Corruption is a gear-based system in which gear can drop with various bonus passive effects, but each of them also adds a negative stat, corruption, whose stacking gifts, in brackets, adverse side effects, such as lower movement, up to outright ill negation. BFA's legendary item, another Raytheon Cloak, has the goal to ease those negative side effects in order to use and maintain as many bonus passives as possible. The corruption system is an evolution in itself of the gear obtained in a patch 815 mini-raid, Crucible of Storms, in which some pieces had bonus effects but also passive downsides as well. In Shadowlands, the corruption system will be removed and the essences will be unusable in current content. In Change, we will have the Covenants and the Soulbinds and the Soul Conduits systems, which will mean you will have to choose a Covenant and in it how to evolve each Soulbind tree with Soul Conduits that drop from various sources. This was a quick flyover of the systems, past, present and future in the game. What can we say about all those systems then, and what effect they have? Well, okay, and I smashed my head over the wall about this for a while now, because I have tried to understand the reasoning of adding and removing all this stuff again and again, and I simply cannot get around it. Because the more I look at these systems, the more pointless they feel. Let's start with a simple thing for a new player. I know that in Shadowlands this will be changed, but stick with me for now. From a new player perspective, the experience now as you level through from the start to Mists of Pandaria, skipping a couple of expansions, is relatively consistent systems-wise. You get gear, you replace gear as you get better items. And then you get to Draenor. In Draenor, you start the garrison. You get this amazing place, the first schematics and buildings, you make decisions and everything, and it is and feels great. And then you finish your first zone and drop everything as you've thrown into Legion. And you gain this amazing artifact after a very long questline, considering the scope of leveling. In Legion, you do maybe a zone and a half that is without any bonus. Yet, just as you get your artifact and check it, you're told that any and all power of the artifact is gone, and the relics only raise some of its high level, and you abandon it as soon as you get a better weapon in Battle for Azeroth. There, you get the art. As you level as well, the art slowly gains levels, making you familiar with the process of earning rings for your Azerite armor. As you cap, and after a short questing grind, you get access to massive Azerite power boost, the essences, and after a painful, at your power level, questline, corruption, not without some bugs related to the unlocking of quests. Let's leave alone for a moment the fact that you of course are not really familiar with any of the characters at this point, of Alliance or Horde, since it's another problem entirely. But the mess the presentation of the story is, and introduction to each expansion, makes it so that all this grandstanding and systems presentation falls flat as well. Not only the game fails to give you a proper introduction to all of these systems, but they also feel so very inconsequential. What's the point of introducing your garrison or your artifact if you are going to drop them in basically 4 or 5 hours of playtime, and that's being generous? What's the point of all the Art of Azeroth and the essences and the corruption if they are not going to be of any use at the end of the expansion? Corruption was added in January. It's been a huge point of contention and is going to be outright removed after less than a year since its inception. All the stuff I mentioned feels tacked on the actual game with no real flow or sense to it, especially giving the game a wider look. But let us get into the details about why not only I do not understand adding all these systems, but also why I think they are actually damaging to the game and its development. First of all, there's a problem with the complexity of the systems, and this is twofold. On the side of the developers, the basic is this. The more complex a system is regarding character power, the harder it is to balance it. As a developer, with the nature of the systems, you are going to struggle balancing them out. Not only we have, as it stands, 12 classes in the game and 36 specs, but you have also all the combinations these systems add to them and the relations between the specs and one another. And let us not add racials or gear stats into the mix. It's basically impossible to be able to balance all of them, and that's one thing. There are simply too many variables. Secondly, on the player's side of things, and this is a major issue, short of the developers making an amazing balancing job, the more complex a system is, the more players feel pushed to use external tools to even understand what is best for them or for the play style they wanna keep, even without trying to min-max everything. RPGs are by nature extremely complex, with different stats, abilities, content, etc. And that comes with territory. But WoW, while certainly complex and definitely prone to theory crafting, until Mists of Pandaria presented a certain amount of choice and very understandable and clear choices to boot. Less choices, still complex, but clear. Partly, we can blame this whole bundle of issues, the idea that there are right and wrong choices trickling down from the hardcore players to the casuals, to the evolution of the internet in gaming in general. But back then, systems were just not as complex and thus hard to understand or figure out. If your design, by design, pushes players out of your game to find answers about their own character, you have a problem with it. Not all players are engineers, and it is not a good feeling for any player to understand they're basically not smart enough to figure out a decent build for themselves without an external tool. Mind you, as you can see from my streams and other videos, I am no Mythic Raider, I am no world first player. In terms of content, the hardest I get is my head of the curve pretty early in a tier with a group of friends. This is not a rant about being pigeonholed into a very specific build or not having a real choice. It's about the intelligibility of a choice and its long-range consequences. Since we touched design, let us get then into the consequences designing these systems as. As much as we can say classes are designed from the ground up, with a top of systems different each expansion, that's completely not the case, and the transition from Warlords to Legion and then to BFA and now Shadowlands is just a huge no to that theory. I hope partially in Shadowlands things will be different, but with the new starting zone. But these systems have the consequence that they need to have classes designed around them in order to have the whole thing working and bundled properly for 2 years of endgame content. Naked classes need, and I underline need, to feel incomplete in order for these systems to actually work properly. And that is a massive problem, because every time a new system is introduced, some level of class redesign is necessary, leading to class design that is at best jarring and at worst inconsistent with time. Class spec design, I know I am repetitive here, is hard to figure out in the best of cases. This whole 2 years long trench coat is not helping that job at all. And last note, it feels so very unnecessary and gratuitous and wasted effort, both as a new player jumping into the last expansion come pre-patch and launch, and from the perspective of an old player who has seen all these systems come and go for 2 free expansions in a row now, not to mention demotivating to engage with them aside for the least needed. But it's exciting to get new toys, you may say. I may even agree, although I am personally steering that argument more towards more content, aka more dungeons, more raids, more BGs, etc. But new toys do not need to cage a whole expansion, and, most importantly, what's the point if by design you get those toys regularly taken away from you and then given back with a new coat of paint? Bottom line, nobody's asking for this. Nobody wants to be gifted things only to know they'll be taken down in a couple of years. Nobody wants systems that are basically unbalanceable either. Most importantly, they are not necessary for a successful expansion or MMORPG. ESO and Final Fantasy XIV are well healthy without them. They got their gear, their stats, their set bonuses, their skill trees, and that's it. They have their issues, absolutely, and I've spoken about them in other videos, but nothing so deeply part of their experience. The first time I jotted down my ideas out loud, this video was gonna be like an hour long, so I'll stop for now. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Check out my Twitch, I stream basically every day, aside Monday on a schedule that you can check there. And most importantly, please share this, both if you agree and disagree, because I do believe this merits discussion. It's likely way too late for Shadowlands, but we may not be too late to steer the development of the expansion after this one. Comment down below, and thanks for watching. See you next time.